Let's see where we can pick up. Uh, we're going to log back on and pick up where we left off. Let's let's pick up at this point, if we can. Philip's reasoning is the reasoning of a man who is enslaved to the facts. Uh, Jesus asked him to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Verse 6. The other disciples overheard the discussion between Jesus and Philip, but remained silent, all except Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. Uh, Let me wait a few seconds until everyone has had an opportunity to reconnect. Uh, uh, and when we reconnect, let's look at verse 6 of John. Uh, okay. We're getting those who are reconnecting with us. Okay, I'm sorry about that glitch. We lost all of you. Some of you are reconnecting. Uh, uh, let's give me a second, and I want to find a good place to begin. Uh, okay, as I was saying, Jesus has left Jerusalem. He is now in Galilee, in the region of the Sea of Tiberias. The crowd has followed him. And he looks up in the distance, and he if you are reconnecting, make sure that you are not on our last stream. The last stream is when we had our timer. The timer is not on, so you should be on the second stream, which does not have a timer. In other words, I have been live now for 6 minutes and 21 seconds. So if you can migrate to that last video, then chances are you will catch me without having to go through the timer. All right. All right. Those of you who are on okay, give me a second. All right, let's see if we make sure that you're on the right video, all right? Not the one, because you're gonna have at least 2 videos posted, depending on which platform you're on. You want to migrate to the video that does not have the timer. Okay, all right, let's see if we can, we do have a number of you back with us. So let me see if I can, okay. All right, okay. All right. Let's try. Okay, everybody, the ones who have logged in, you are at the right place. Okay. So let me try now to pick up where Jesus calls sees the multitude, all right? And then he turns to Philip, and he asks Philip the question, how are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? That's verse 5 of chapter 6. Why does Jesus ask questions when he knows the answer? Should we take offense? No. Remember that Jesus is the teacher and Philip is the student. And the best instructional paradigm is the catechetical method, questions and answers. John explains Jesus' reasoning in these words. This he said to test it, for he himself knew what he would do. Verse 6. I think we should make a distinction between the words testing and tempting, which are often used interchangeably. In the Epistle to James, chapter 1, verses 13 through 14, we read, let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. In that same epistle, James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, we read, "Count it all joy, my brethren, when you meet various trials, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." Jesus tested Philip. What has Philip learned from following Jesus? In following Jesus, we are expected to gain wisdom, not just knowledge. Does Philip's answer reflect knowledge or wisdom? Philip answered Jesus, 200 denarii would not buy enough bread for each of them to get a little. This is factual knowledge, the kind we often resort to when confronted with problems that appear intractable or mammoth. The average wage earner in Jesus' day earned 1 denarius a day. Therefore, 200 denarii would require that wage earner to work for 200 days. Philip knew that if one had worked more than half a year, he still would not have enough money to buy bread for this multitude. We can only conclude that the multitudes were huge. This is where the majority of believers function. We, like Philip, are stymied by the costs. Rationality is the normative. To feed the hungry crowd is too expensive. Even 200 denarii are not enough for the crowds to get enough to satisfy their hunger. This is the attitude of the modern church. It explains why poverty and hunger are still problems which vex the masses. The enormity of the problem stymies our actions. Eradicating worldwide poverty, we say, is unrealistic. There is not enough money to buy bread for the hungry masses. There is not enough money to house the homeless, not enough money to clothe the naked, not enough money to eradicate poverty, and not enough money to cure a global pandemic. I'm reminded of words spoken by Leon Sullivan. He often quoted this saying, "Give a man a fish and he can eat 1 meal. Teach a man to fish and he can eat for a lifetime." Philip's reasoning is the reasoning of a man who is enslaved to the facts. Jesus asked him to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Verse 6. The other disciples overheard the discussion between Jesus and Philip, but remained silent, all except Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. Now, Andrew offered a solution to the problem, but his answer seems totally void of reason. It is not rational and appears to be irrelevant to the discussion at hand. Nevertheless, he blurted out with the confidence of a sophomore and is embarrassed. The word sophomore comes from 2 Greek words, sophos, wise, and moros, foolish. Therefore, sophomore is a wise fool. This is where a little learning is a dangerous thing. Is Andrew a wise fool? Listen again to the irrationality of his answer. There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Verse 9. It is an impulsive answer, which is on its face irrational, but is an answer based on faith. Impulsiveness must run in Andrew's family. I would ask that you would listen closer to his words unfiltered, but on reflection, he snatches them back with the same impulsiveness, adding the disclaimer, but what are they among so many? He is embarrassed that he has spoken without thinking, spoken so curtly, spoken without considering all of the options. But the difference between the solutions of Philip and Andrew was that Andrew, without realizing it, spoke as a person of faith. Corrie ten Boom reminds us that faith sees the invisible, believes the unbelievable, and receives the impossible. Let me repeat that. Faith sees the invisible, believes the unbelievable, and receives the impossible. Andrew said, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish." This is an expression of faith. Interestingly, Jesus does not criticize Andrew's response. Instead of criticizing, he acts on it. All the disciples were amazed, surprised, and stupefied by Andrew's answer. The other disciples knew that Jesus would scold him for his answer. Instead, Jesus turned to the other disciples and said to them, "Make the people sit down." Verse 10. John the Evangelist adds that there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. Verse 11. Were there men only? In the parallel, which is found in Matthew chapter 14 and verse 21, we learn that the number that ate was greater than the 5,000. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. When the women and children are counted, the number exceeds 5,000. The dialogue that is missing is the conversation between the lad and Andrew. I have several unanswered questions. 1. How did Andrew know that the boy had the bread and fish? 2. How did Andrew know that the boy was willing to share his food to feed the multitude? 3. Did the boy voluntarily give up his food, or did Andrew pay him for the food? Or did Andrew pressure the lad to give up his food? 4. What motivated the lad to part company with his food? 5. Why is he the only one who has brought food? 6. Who was the boy? 7. Has he traveled alone? Are his parents with him? 8. If not, was it not irresponsible for his parents to permit him to join the massive crowd without supervision and without the care of an adult? Well, John the Evangelist knew we would have questions that must go unanswered. But the unanswered questions give legitimacy to the narrative. The absurdity of the narrative is its truthfulness. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. The order is significant. Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, bread in the hands of the bread of life, and when he had given thanks. The 5 loaves seemed so inadequate when faced with the enormity of the need. 5,000 men, not counting women and children. When resources are few and limited, then prayer is a multiplier. Give thanks in all circumstances. Peter Marshall, the noted Presbyterian preacher, once said to his wife, Catherine, when she served leftovers for dinner, "Catherine, you must say grace, because the Lord knows I am not thankful for this." Like Peter Marshall, we are tempted to begrudge the scarcity and inadequacy of the resource in the face of the enormity of the need. Then we realize that God is a multiplier if only we thank God for the gift God has bestowed, even the leftovers. And they distributed the bread to those who were seated, so also the fish, as much as they wanted. Verse 11. Imagine the multitude ate all they wanted and more until they were filled. If we think that the miracle is to be found in the fact that they all ate until they were filled, we may be surprised. What if the miracle is to be discovered in the leftovers? Verse 12, and when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the fragments left over, that nothing may be lost." 13. So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. I've always found this intriguing. After they had eaten, Jesus instructed the disciples to gather up the leftovers, the fragments. When the disciples had finished gathering the leftovers, they had 12 baskets or satchels full. Why did they gather up the leftovers? Jesus gives the reason for this act in these words, that nothing may be lost. Verse 12. In other words, the disciples will eat this food for several days. Now, there is nothing in Scripture that hints at their eating this leftover or the occasion on which they ate it, but Jesus' words are true. If he spoke it, then it was. In the Old Testament, when Israel attempted to store up the manna, you will remember that it spoiled. The leftovers, the fragments, spoiled. Now, contrast that with this. These leftovers, these fragments, will not spoil. Why? Because Jesus himself is the bread of life. Once again, we see that the miracle or signs in the Gospel of John are more miraculous than all the other miracles throughout the Gospel. The narrative concludes with Jesus evading the crowd when they sought to make him king by force. John the Evangelist writes, verse 14, when the people saw the sign which he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." 15, perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Well, the second section of today's lesson is John chapter 6, verses 16 through 21. The heading is Jesus walks on the water. Now, let us turn to John 6, 16, and read these verses together. 16. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea. 17. Got into a boat and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. 18. The sea rose because a strong wind was blowing. 19. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near to the boat. They were frightened. 20. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." 21. Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. This is the reading. This is another one of those memorable episodes in the life of Jesus, which takes place on water. He called his disciples from the sea to become fishers of men. They would return to the sea for a source of food, but also as a means of travel. You will recall the panic they experienced when they thought their lives were in danger. Caught in a sudden storm, they found themselves at war with the elements and losing. "Master, carest thou not that we perish?" Jesus spoke to the water and to the wind, saying, "Peace, be still." The gospel writer says in that incident, there was a great calm. Now, we turn to this episode which occurred at sea in the Gospel of John. We're told that it is evening and that it is dark, and Jesus remains behind, and the disciples board a boat, and they travel the sea en route to Capernaum. And we're told that the winds are strong. In one version, the winds are contrary. Jesus has remained on land while the disciples find themselves rowing in difficult circumstances. The winds frustrate their progress. After hours, they had traveled only 3 or 4 miles. How had Jesus planned to travel to Capernaum? Well, we're not told. Jesus' decision to remain is a personal decision. If this follows immediately upon the feeding of the 5,000, you know that Jesus barely escaped the multitude's attempt to overpower him, forcing him to assume the Davidic throne. The time alone was devoted to prayer and meditation. This prayer and meditation are interrupted by the disciples' troubles at sea. Jesus cannot ignore the plight of his disciples. Their lives are at risk, and therefore he goes to them walking on the water. The disciples are frightened by the sight they behold. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat. And John says, and immediately the boat was at land, to which they were going. Well, what is the meaning of this miracle? Let me say what it is not. This miracle is not an occasion for Jesus to engage in showmanship, a vulgar display of power. In the temptation narrative, Jesus avoided the temptation to abuse the powers God had given him. I think we can agree that Jesus had no plans to walk the sea to Capernaum. He could have calmed the sea from shore. In other words, he could have spoken from where he was and calmed the sea, just as he had spoken from a distance and healed the sick. But he went to the disciples because the disciples were in trouble. They needed to see Jesus and know assuredly that he not only cared, but that he cared enough to intervene in their personal struggles. Jesus is not only the Son of God, he is God, the divine creator, who has the power over the creative universe. Well, this is a good place for us to stop. I would ask that you type your questions in the chat window, and we'll try to bring them into the discussion. In the meantime, we welcome those of you who joined us, and I do apologize for the streaming problem that we had. And I really do think that we're going to incur these problems as long as we have demands on the broadband, because I think that's the only explanation for that. Let's see. We had a number of you who joined us back, and I thank you for doing that. Bruce is back on. Billy, thank you. Juanita, Inez, good to have you today. Louis, thank you. Amelita Ross, thanks so much for coming back. Vera Bullock, great to have you. Joyce, Ursula, Jerry Waters, Gloria Shields, Barbara Davis, Eleanor Stewart, Jerry Smith, Alberta Smith, and Alyssa Morganette. Well, thanks so much for joining us back. It's unfortunate. There were quite a number of others who were on. Some did not log back in, but are nevertheless listening to us. Let's see. Are there any questions? If you have a question or comment, I would encourage you to enter it into the chat window. And let's see if we can bring it into the broadcast. The feeding of the 5,000 is uh, one of the miracles that really sort of capture our imagination. Thanks, and Archie, log back on, and Anna Denham, thank you. Great to have you log back. We do appreciate your faithfulness. Uh, it, there is no there is no good answer to it. We just try to do it. Keep 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 our discussion. If you missed the first part, the likelihood the first part is you can get on YouTube, and the second part is also going to be published on YouTube. And just put the two together, and you should have the complete lecture. All right. Thank you for joining with us. Be safe and have a very good holiday weekend. Thanks for being with us today. And God bless you and God keep you is my prayer.
Hey, hey, let me hear you say